He flew some of the most intense low-level canyon scenes ever caught on camera. And you've probably seen his work, whether you realize it or not. He's a retired U.S. Navy commander and two-time Blue Angel.
The aircraft catapult system is the most intense roller coaster you could ever get on.
He went from flying combat missions overseas to helping bring to life the near-impossible flying scenes of Top Gun Maverick.
I'll give credit where credit's due. I thought Tom was incredible.
We sit down to talk about how to push ourselves to the limit, elevate those around us, and how to navigate every corner of aviation.
Doesn't matter what you fly. Everything is great.
Meet Frank Weisser. 3, 2, 1. Frank, thank you so much for being here with us. We're excited to have you on this episode of Between Two Wings. The first question that I really wanted to ask you, tell me about your first flight.
I have very fond memories of it, actually, as do probably most. It was in Pensacola, Florida, in the T-34C, the Turbo Mentor. I'd been in a couple small airplanes before because I was skydiving. And as a young man, and even in college, I'd intended to go Navy SEALs. And maybe we'll talk about that later. But for me, aviation had not been something I'd necessarily considered. And so I ended up going to flight school in Pensacola as a Navy pilot. And the first flight is in a T-34C, which to me now in retrospect is amazing that the first time I ever taxied or controlled an aircraft was a turboprop with 550 shaft horsepower or something. And you get in this airplane and they explain everything to you. I was insanely bad at every aspect of it. I couldn't even taxi it properly. And that's another story that I won't waste your time with. But once they finally allowed me to even to take off, they go through this brief and they say, you're going to hold the brakes, you're going to run the power up, you're going to release the brakes, the aircraft's going to veer right, you need to put in rudder, you're going to apply the right amount of rudder, and then it's you're going to overcorrect and it's go one way, and after about 2 or 3 seconds, I'm the take controls, I'm the take off, and I'll give it to you at some point later. And you say, no, I'll do it right. And then, of course, 2 seconds after you release the brakes, you hear the person in the back, I got it, and off you go. But we flew for 2 or 3 hours, and there was a point probably 20 minutes into it where we're 8,000 or 10,000 feet over Pensacola, Florida, and I just kind of sat back in the chair. I'm overwhelmed with every aspect of it, but I thought, this is the coolest thing I've ever done. And I'd been mountain climbing and skydiving and scuba diving and a bunch of really fun activities, but I'd never done that. And it was just a magical experience. And in that moment, I just thought to myself, how lucky am I to hopefully do this for my whole life?
You got hooked right off the bat.
Right? And I think that's true for most people.
I think that most people can probably relate to that, is that they get up there the first time, they're freaked out, it's overwhelming, sensory overload, and then they take a second to really realize it once you absorb what's happening and you're like, all right, I'm in. Can you tell me a little bit more about your career in the military? You were career Navy, and obviously we'll get into you flying with the Blue Angels, but can you tell me a little bit about how you joined the military, your background, and then what you ended up flying?
I selected jets, so you go to jet training, and we flew in a really old jet back then. It was a T2 Charlie Buckeye. And it was a really old jet. I mean, steam gauges, it would fly fast, and that's what we used it for, to shoot approaches at 250 knots. And we used it for gunnery practice and aerial gunnery, that is, and learning how to land on the carrier and that sort of stuff. But it was an old airplane. And then we moved to the T-45 Charlie, which was the newer jet trainer, 2-seat also tandem, glass displays, heads-up display. It could simulate dropping bombs. It could actually drop bombs. It could simulate shooting down aircraft, land on the aircraft carrier, fly formation, low levels, all the stuff, and a really advanced digital display. And so that was a terrific airplane for that. I moved from that. I instructed in that for a little bit after I graduated, and then I moved to the F-18. And I chose the F-18 Charlie, which was the single-seat variant. And we had a little bit of ability to kind of pick and choose what we wanted there. The F-14 was fading out, the legendary Tomcat of Top Gun original fame. And then the Super Hornet was just barely coming online. And so the Hornet, for lack of a better term back then, was just the single-seat version. The Super Hornet had a single seat and a 2-seat. And so I switched to that airplane and learned it takes about a year to fly. And then I flew that for almost the next 20 years. But in retrospect, my experience in these airplanes and flying off aircraft carriers and with the Blue Angels and even Top Gun Maverick, I look back on my experience, and I had about a little more than a year to fly the T-45 as a flight instructor. And the timing was such that I was flying with a lot of my friends, Naval Academy classmates and buddies who I'd met in flight school. And now, at the drop of a hat, you get winged, and now I'm a flight instructor for a time. And so I'm flying with a lot of my friends teaching this airplane. And I look back on that year, and I had the most fun of my entire life in aviation, flying that airplane. And it was the least powerful of all the jets I flew. It's the least advanced. We weren't flying it in combat, but it was flying. And we were doing incredible things. And more importantly, I was flying 3 times a day, 6 days a week. And I just loved every aspect of it. And it's funny to me in retrospect that most fighter pilots, if they get sent to do that as an instructor, it's not the desired option. They'd rather go to test pilot school or Top Gun or teach an F-18. But it was just such an awesome time. And you hear this in flight school, and people tell you, it doesn't matter what you fly. Everything is great. Point is, if you're flying in a 150 or a Bonanza or a Gulfstream or an F-18, it's all great. And so for me, that was the lesson. Like, here I am in arguably the worst of all the Navy planes I flew, but I had the best time. I had more fun flying in this T-45 than I did, to some degree, air shows with the Blue Angels. And so that was my career in aviation. And then I'd done a tiny bit of GA flying. I had the irony of, as a military pilot, having never flown anything before, is when you get winged, you get your statements that says you're qualified in these aircraft. And I was able to go to the FSDO, take an exam, and they just basically gave me all my ratings. I got private pilot, I got commercial, I got instrument, and single engine, multi-engine. And I knew nothing about fly. I mean, I knew how to fly F-8 or a fighter to some degree, but I didn't know how to fly. I didn't think. And so I went to the local airport in Meridian at Key Field, and I wanted to go rent a 152 and see if I knew what to do. And so I get in, and the guy says, okay, it's, back then $42 wet for an hour of flying.
I wish.
This is 2002 or 3. And I said, okay, do I need to go to class for a week to learn the airplane? No. Do I need to get in the simulator? No. What do we do? He's like, well, I'll take you up, we'll check you out, do a couple landings, and it's yours.
You're like, what?
Yeah, I almost wet myself. Like, I'm not ready for this. I need to prepare. That takes weeks of studying. Right. And we get in this airplane, and we start it up, we push the throttle forward, and we lift it off at 50 or 60 miles an hour, and we're about 100 feet climbing at about 100 feet a minute. Mm-hmm. And I said, all right, I think I've sorted this out. I've got this. And so I'm not really worried about being able to control this airplane. And so off we go. And a couple landings. We didn't know how to flare. That was new for me. But once I figured that out, it was pretty easy, and it was an awesome airplane. And then I flew a bit of GA as we went. And then towards the end of my military career, I did two things. I bought a Baron 3 or 4 years before I retired, because we had landed an air park that maybe we can talk about. But then I got typed in the Gulfstream. And that became my transition from military to GA flying and corporate flying.
Yeah, you really have touched almost every corner of flying.
Yeah,
not most can say that.
It's been an adventure. Actually, there was a point. So I served as a Navy pilot from 2000 to 2021. Mm-hmm. And in 2017, in 2015, I bought property at an air park, expecting to build a house there in a hangar and live there full time. In 2017, I bought a Baron. And so now I'm flying a Baron and an F-18. And for a period, I kept the Baron at the base in Pensacola, and our C-130 on the Blue Angels was broken. So I'm using our little Baron to ferry around our sailors and fix airplanes. And that was quite an adventure in and of itself. But I actually found, surprisingly to me, that the Baron made me a better F-18 pilot. And to some degree, the F-18 made me a better Baron pilot. And I didn't want to give up the ability to have more than one airplane in my life, which is why, as my F-18 time kind of winded down, I transitioned and went and got type rated in the Gulfstream. I paid for it on my own. I was a contractor. I wasn't working for anyone. I was still active duty, so I'd take vacation time a couple days a month to be able to fly this thing. But there was this one wild week where I would fly my airplane, the Baron, from North Georgia down to Griffin, Georgia, where the Beechcraft Whisperer lives, mm-hmm. And so I'd take it to this little air park. They would fix it. And then in return, it's gone for a week, so they had a Cessna 150 that you could take as a loaner. And then I would fly that up to my air park, and that was always my it still is to this day, the most challenging flight I have all year, because I'd never flown the thing. And, ironically, I got in it the first time. I dropped the Baron off. I hopped in this airplane, having never flown a 150. I look around. I can't find a checklist, a laminated card, anything, so I get back out, and I said, do you have a checklist? And the A&P said, for what? I said, well, to start it. And he goes, if you know how to start this thing, you're not allowed to take it. I was like, I'll
figure it out.
I'll be okay. And so I run back in the airplane. I pull out my iPhone. I'm Googling Cessna 150 start checklist. I found something. I screenshot it. Yeah. And off I went. But then a week later, I bring it back. And it was on a Monday. I brought it back, flew this 150 at 80 miles an hour, an hour south. Then I hopped in my Baron, flew a Baron at about 160. I doubled the speed, flew home. Jumped in a car, went to the airport, flew a Gulfstream that afternoon or the next day, a G450 at double the speed of the Baron, across the country. And then I topped another commercial flight back to Pensacola for my Blue Angel job I had to do that week. And I flew a Legacy F-18 in an air show practice, which was better than the Gulfstream from a capability perspective. And the very next day, my other hat was as the transition officer moving us into the Super Hornet. So now I'm in a brand new F-18 Super Hornet testing it for this air show. So it was this wild week of aviation where you go from a 150 and like every day you basically double your capabilities or whatever up until Friday in the Super Hornet, and then home for the weekend to hopefully do it again the next week.
Every step of the way, you just got more advanced.
Yeah, it was a really cool, in retrospect, to see it happen that way.
Did you have a routine at all to make you switch off one airplane in your head? How did you compartmentalize that?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Because I feel like I would be completely misunderstanding and swapping everything. I mean, your call sign changes, you're messing up on the radios.
Ironically, that's the hardest part, probably, is the call sign.
I'm sure.
That might be. And every now and again, I would, in the Baron, call myself Blue Angel 5 or Blue Angel 5.
Hilarious.
I did a couple of instructional hours in the Baron early on, right after I bought it, with a gentleman in Pensacola who was really helpful to understand the airplane. And it's not a hard airplane to fly, especially if you spent 20 years flying something else. And so we got out and I said, goods and bads, tell me everything I did wrong. He said, no, it's fine. I said, I know I messed up. I know I messed up a lot of stuff. So just start picking stuff. He goes, well, when you check in with the tower, you don't have to tell them that you're a single 5 miles out for the initial or whatever. And I didn't even know what he was saying. But 20 years of flying fighters, we would always say, we're a flight of 2 at 10 miles for the overhead, or I'm a single for the ILS. Because it's routine that you're 2-4 airplanes together. And I had apparently made the call that I'm a single Baron at 5 miles for the whatever. And
that's funny.
He's like, they know.
You can cut that out.
Yeah. So I was having little transition issues like that as I switched between the two. But the one thing that was really helpful to me, and I'm a novice in terms of total airplanes I've flown compared to some of the incredible aviators I've had the privilege to be around. But as I learned more, what I found was that they all had so many similarities that the more you learn, the better you are at all of them.
Of course.
And you would actually learn a little bit about an airplane you'd flown for years by learning a new aircraft. And it would something would click that like, oh, yeah, that hadn't really resonated with me, or I didn't fully understand that until I just learned it a different way. Right.
The exposure gave you that proficiency that you were looking for, that you didn't think you needed, but almost revealed something new.
Totally.
Right. Change the perspective for sure. You said your proudest moments weren't flying with the Blue Angels or flying for Top Gun Maverick, but they were your combat deployments. Why is that?
I feel like personally, these shiny objects in my life, in my aviation career, are time with the Blue Angels, which was almost 10 years of my career, and then being a part of Top Gun Maverick. In both cases, they were exceptional opportunities, and I loved them, and I learned more about aviation and met some incredible people. But for me, what I'm most proud of is the deployments. And no one joins to serve. I don't think anyone joins to serve to necessarily be a Blue Angel, and certainly not to be a part of a major motion picture. But we did all join to serve our country. We joined to support and defend. That's the deal. In any way that the government and the military needs us to do it. And in my case, like I said, I hadn't even anticipated going into aviation, but there I was, chosen for me, and now that's my job. I'm just here to serve. And so if this is the manner in which you choose for me to do that, then here we go. But the deployments for me, we're just a supporting role. An F-18 off a carrier, it's a really interesting situation where you have warships and they all have their weapon systems. And you might have standard missiles, or you might have close-in gun systems. But the weapons of an aircraft carrier are the airplanes. It has some really rudimentary self-defense systems, but it's not shooting missiles. It's not launching Tomahawks. It's launching airplanes. We are the weapon. And so you have this case where you have a 6,000-person aircraft carrier, but only maybe 40 or 50 fighters. And everything is built around supporting those aircraft. But once those airplanes launch, we're now a supporting element as well, because we're supporting the men and women on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan, you name it. And so I love that aspect, that we're just there to make sure that we do the very best we can to take care of the people on the ground who are really in harm's way in that moment. And it really was an important aspect of that time. And we serve the best way we can. And there's some wonderful days where you're on the aircraft carrier, you're in the Pacific, the ocean is as blue as you can possibly imagine, and you're flying off of atolls that you've only read about in books from World War II, and you just can't fathom that you're there. You're almost back in time in these places. And then the very next day, you might be shooting off into the darkness off the coast of the North Arabian Sea going into Afghanistan, and has its own challenges. And so you get to fly in a variety of different ways, but knowing that you're doing good, when you hear the men and women on the ground talking or taking fire, and you know that you're supporting them, and you're supporting them in a meaningful way, and then in some cases you're saving their lives, that's a really powerful thing. And it makes you grateful for the instructors you've had, the trainers you've had, the opportunity to fly these awesome airplanes that we have in America, the very best technology, the equipment in the whole world, and that we can use it day and night. That's really cool. So I look back really proudly on the times we spent deployed and grateful that we had that opportunity.
Yeah, it's a great perspective. And it really helps to know that that's what majority of folks like you think about. It's inspiring to know that there are the people behind you that get you where you are, and you give credit where credit's due, for sure. Tell me a little bit more about how it felt to take off of an aircraft carrier. Walk me through what goes through your head in a moment like that, where it's pitch black outside, you're in the middle of the ocean. What does that feel like?
The aircraft catapult system is the most intense roller coaster you could ever get on. If you can picture some of these coasters that you sit in and it just goes from 0 to a million, it feels like in an instant, that's what the catapult is, except you're also in control of it. The F-18 is one of the first airplanes where you don't actually hold onto the stick. You trim the aircraft with a nose-up attitude that the airplane's going to fly on its own. And the physical effect of the catapult launch can be so intense that there is a fear that if you're holding onto the stick, especially too tight, you might then react to the physical force, because you experience G's in 3 axes. You know, you'll experience it, a NASCAR driver experiences it centrifugally into the track on a raised track. An astronaut, in some cases, laying backwards, shooting up to the moon, feels it through themselves into the chair, and us also on the aircraft carrier. It pushes you into the chair. And then once you're flying, you feel it in the Z-axis as you're doing a loop or a tight turn, and the G's are pushing through your head down, and that's why you have blood loss and loss of consciousness. But when it pushes you back in the chair, you almost, in some cases, you can think, but you can't really talk or breathe or function very well. So if you grabbed the stick and then pulled back also because the force of gravity did that, you would over-rotate. So what we do in the F-18 is we put our left hand on the throttle all the way forward, usually full power, full afterburner, and the right hand on a little, we call it a towel rack, and you hold there. And now the aircraft knows what it's doing. It's going to lift off. Once you're airborne, it sets a nose-up attitude. Then you control the stick and fly away. Daytime, it's incredible. It's in good weather. Daytime, flying around the carrier is the coolest thing in all of aviation. Nighttime, maybe a little less incredible, only in the sense that it's work, because it's challenging and it's hard, and it's just pitch black. And that's what you don't really. I didn't understand that. I had hundreds of nighttime hours as a flight instructor and as learning for 4 or 5 years before I went to the carrier. But that's all taking off out of wherever you are with ambient lighting from the city, from the runways, you name it. And on the aircraft carrier, there's nothing. It's hundreds of miles to the nearest piece of land, and it's just black everywhere. And so that's the intense aspect. You might as well be in a cave, 100 feet underground, where you turn off all the lights and you say, I've never seen a darkness like this. That is the aircraft carrier.
It's terrifying.
So yeah, it can be if you're not ready for it. And you're just taught to use your instruments, which works great unless the instruments fail. Then it proves, why teamwork helps and why being confident in your job matters. But yeah, it is an exhilarating experience for sure. And also very challenging and very unforgiving. Aviation in general is unforgiving.
Right.
But certainly around the aircraft carrier where you have no other options is hard. Was
there a moment that you realized that flying was more than just being a pilot in that cockpit alone?
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yes. I think so many military people go into aviation because they want to fly these incredible machines. Mm-hmm. And they are incredible, no question about it. But I think most of us, having served, whether it's 10 years or 30 years, leave saying the machines were great, but what I got the most from are the people I served with, both in the air and on the ground, and the experience, the chance to do a job where we're both passionate about it, where it matters. And that's not a line. That's the God's honest truth, is that the airplanes are wonderful, but it's just a machine. The stories that create these airplanes, the engineers who designed them and built them, the sailors and Marines who maintain them, and then the pilots who fly them. That part's remarkable. And you develop this really cool relationship, both with the people you fly with. The level of trust is really high because you're trusting each other with your lives over and over and over again. Well, I call it high trust. That term was coined by a Blue Angel boss I worked with. And I really think it's true. When you trust someone else with your life and they trust you with theirs over and over again, that's a different level of trust. But that same amount of trust is placed in the men and women on the flight deck. And I'll say they have a lot more dangerous job than we do. I mean, it's scary launching off the aircraft carrier at night into harm's way. But I'd rather do that than walk around a flight deck in the dark at night with turning propellers, rotor blades, jet engines. You trip on the scupper and you're off into the ocean and you're never going to be found probably. So it is one of the most dangerous work environments in the world. And we have young men and women, 18, 19 years old. The average age on the flight deck is like 18 or 19. It's incredible. Crazy. And so I have a lot of respect for those who do that.
Yeah.
And not just do it, but do it while they fix our aircraft in a way that allows us to launch safely. And so it's most definitely about the people, not the machine.
It's a well-oiled machine for sure. Everybody working together for one general purpose that you all bond together on, and that's serving the country and doing your job as best as you can in the circumstances in a situation like that. So it really is amazing. You served not just once, but twice for the Blue Angels, which is a very rare distinction. What drew you back for that second tour? And I'd love to hear maybe a little bit about the difference between the first time and the second time.
They were very different experiences for me. I joined the Blue Angels in the summer of 2007, the first time, and it was the very traditional process. I joined with two other individuals who were still close friends of mine. We were the pilots. We had a whole crew of other officers and sailors who joined us the same year. And then the three of us got assigned the different positions. One went to the right wing, one went left wing. I became the narrator for that next year. The narrator during the air show announces the show, as you'd expect, but also during the week is the VIP pilot and flies around our media personalities, celebrities, anyone who can generate their own media. And we give them this chance to be in the airplane with us. And then the next 2 years, I flew as the solo pilot for the air show. And I had a wonderful time. The people I worked with were the most exceptional people I've ever been around in my entire life, bar none. When I went back the second time, it had followed my first tour, which was then followed by 3 years on an aircraft carrier, and then working for NATO, which was a remarkable opportunity as well, but not in a flying capacity. And as we get more senior in the military, they want to make sure you're kind of not a one-trick pony, that you can do something other than fly an airplane. So they encourage you to do a staff job where you do something else. And so we chose to go to Europe and be a part of the NATO community over there, which was a wonderful opportunity. And I learned a lot from the people I served with. But we had a crash on June 2nd, 2016, the Blue Angels did, in Smyrna, Tennessee, which is sort of the Nashville air show. And the pilot flying the number 6 plane that day was Jeff Koos. And Jeff had been a Blue Angel for a year and a half. And it seems to always be this case that the best of us go first, you know, and the friends I've had who I've lost in aviation were unquestionably the best, the people I've ever been around, both as individuals and as pilots. And I think Jeff fit that bill too. And he crashed on a takeoff maneuver out of the Smyrna Air Show. And when that happens, there is, the squadron obviously shuts down. They're going to investigate the mishap and figure out what happened. But if we're going to put the show back together and get back on the road and continue to learn from this lesson and use our airplanes to motivate and inspire, you have to bring in another pilot. The air show, an irony of how we do business as the Blue Angels is that 5 airplanes is far less safe than 6. And the reason is when we put our Delta formation together, the number 4 pilot is almost directly below the number 1 pilot and is the backup for the number 1 pilot, because you never want to have a system that's a single point of failure. And if everyone is trusting number 1 to do everything perfectly, or they die, that's not a great system. So the way the scan works in the aircraft, because of our heads-up display, is 4 can back up 1. In a steep descent, in a dive, in a roll, you name it, 4 is able to scan the airspeed, the altitude, dive angle, and then just give feedback. But when one of the aircraft is missing, 4 slides to a different spot. So now you have no one who's providing any kind of backup. So we wanted to get a new airplane in there as fast as we could. But to do that, it has to be someone who's already flown that spot. The time to train is almost 5 months. So
you guys didn't have time.
So you have to find someone. And then doing that, if there's anyone still even serving, they're serving in a meaningful way, off an aircraft carrier most likely. And They can't just be yanked and pulled and sent to the Blue Angels. The Blue Angels are a nice-to-have organization. Flying off aircraft carriers is the need-to-have situation.
Right.
And in my case, I was in Germany. I hadn't flown in 2 or 3 years. I was getting ready to transition out of the military. We had bought land at that air park, and I was starting a new chapter in my life. But there were very few other options. And so the question was posed to us, can you come back and do this for some period, a year or 2 years? And 3 days after the phone call came, I moved back to America from Germany and left my wife and 3 kids there for 2 months to get everything put together, to close bank accounts, sell cars, move out of our house, and hopped right back into the F-18. What's remarkable about the experience to me was simply the fact that, having not flown anything for 3 years, I went back and had 5 hours in F-18 at our training command, got back in for the first day of the Blue Angel training process. We had a couple weeks where it was just 2 a day every day to get me back up. I felt like within the first 10 or 15 minutes that I was just about ready to go. And I thought I wouldn't be able to do it at all, truthfully. Yeah. I thought I'll never be able to get back to where I was. And the benefit of the way the Blue Angels do their business, we fly so much together. We train so hard. We get so many practice repetitions before the show. The muscle memory is there. You can almost just close your eyes and you remember it. So the only hard part was the little things that had changed over the years that I'd been gone. But just hopping in the show, the formation was the same. The flying was about the same. And so I felt pretty confident within a couple of days that we could go take this show on the road. And they gave us, once again, plenty of time. So we did a show a couple weeks later. And from then it was that season and the next season and beyond. And we were back at it. I came back with renewed energy for the squadron, I felt like, and a different perspective on the importance of having ex-Blue Angels involved. We have this really great network of ex-Blue Angels who have served on the team in any number of ways, and they're invited to every air show around the country to come to the brief, the debrief, watch the air show, and their feedback can be really valuable to the team to say, before you try that, just know that we did that about 8 years ago, and we got really close, or we were lucky that something bad didn't happen, and we need that feedback. And so I came back having been both a 3-year Blue Angel, but then an X for 6 years, and now back, allowed me to bring, I think, a different level of experience to the mix.
Right. And that was obviously a very emotional time for everybody involved following something so tragic. So I'm glad that you had the perspective of coming in a more positive manner, and that you all were able to change that mindset of this is how we're going to move on, but also improve and honor Jeff and continue to do what we do best. But yeah, that's an amazing story, and something that's so rare for you to come back after all that time, hop in, and it's like riding a bike. So you're about to release your book, Lead Solo. Congratulations. That's really exciting. What prompted you to put all of your stories into one narration? I mean, a lot of pilots, can talk about their flying, but you obviously have a wide variety of experience flying. But what really motivated you to put it down on paper?
Well, I will say I went into it very hesitantly. I had done a handful of presentations and speeches following time with the Blue Angels and Top Gun Maverick coming out. I had done a speech at the Naval Academy for the midshipmen, and then a month or two later, the U.S. Naval Institute, which is a press located on the yard at the Naval Academy, reached out and said they would be interested if I'd consider taking that speech I'd given and just putting it into a short book, a 50 or 60,000 word book. And I said, I appreciate the offer. I'm not really interested in doing that for a variety of reasons. One, because I typically make fun of people who get out of the military and try to leverage it and turn it into a book, a memoir.
Yeah.
I could have named 1,000 people who could have better written a memoir than me. And we sort of went back and forth. And my wife and I were having a conversation one night, and I said, I just don't feel like I'm the right person to do this. I'm not comfortable with it for a lot of reasons. I want my friends to write it. I want the people, my mentors, I want the people who I respect, who I learned from, they should be writing it because I learned it from them. And she said, but they're asking you, so why don't you write it about them? And I had a bit of peace about it. I said, well, gosh, why am I so stupid? I didn't think of this first on my own when they asked me. But I said, you're exactly right. Let me do that. And so I went back to the Naval Institute and said, I'm interested, if you don't mind. It's not a memoir. Can I just write about all the incredible people I've served with, the lessons I've learned from them? And if so, then I'm in, 100% I'm in. And so that's what it became. It became a chance for me to share the important aspects of my military career that I thought were relevant, both in the military and out, and the people I learned them from. Because we really had some exceptional individuals, men and women, young and old, to be around. And I've learned a lot from people very junior to me, and then learned a lot from people very senior to me, both good and bad. And so it gave me that opportunity to do that. And so I had more fun writing it than I expected, because it brought me back into contact with people I hadn't talked to for years, making sure I'd gotten the story just right. It turned out to be a really pleasant experience. So,
well, I'm really excited. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I got a sneak peek into it. I loved every minute of it. I'm really excited to promote it to as many people as I know. Again, it's not necessarily a memoir, but more of like life lessons that you learned and that you carry with you, not only in your flying, but also in your personal life, which I think translates for a lot of career military folks, that they learn all of these amazing things from the folks around them, and then they translate it afterwards into their personal life. And that's really memorable. So
for sure.
So I think most would agree that flying for the Blue Angels would have been the flashiest part of anyone's flying career. But then you turned around and worked on one of the biggest movies of summer of 2022 and possibly of the past decade. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got roped into flying on Top Gun Maverick?
So as I finished flying for Cooch's spot, I had a couple years left to serve in the Navy. I was at the point where I couldn't go into the reserves. I had to stay on active duty. And so I suggested that we set up a team that transitions us to the F-18 Super Hornet. Because when the Blue Angels moved from the A4, and this is 1985-86 timeframe, to the F-18, two things happened that were unfortunate. One, the test pilots tested this aircraft, and they tested it to make sure it could do everything we needed it to do. And then they started flying Blue Angel maneuvers. And they were doing a fairly benign roll or loop with in formation with two pilots. And they ended up too low, below their min out. And the second pilot hit the water, and the first barely escaped. The second pilot died on impact, and the lead aircraft lived. But they said, okay, we're not airshow pilots. We're done doing this. were giving the airplanes to the Blue Angels. And a couple of the aspects hadn't been fully tested at least to the desires of the Blues. And then one of the Blue Angel pilots that winter training period was trying to test an outside loop, an inverted loop, an afterburner. The aircraft flames out. He ejects, survives. But now you have test pilots trying to be Blue Angels, which they're not. Blue Angels trying to be test pilots, which they're not.
Yeah.
And in both cases, it went wrong. And so the suggestion was, can we maybe combine us? Can we, with a little bit of forethought, put us together, combine the Blue Angels with the test pilots? And so we did that. And that lasted, it was a 3-year process for me to understand the new airplane, to get into the simulator, to fly it. The simulators at Pax River, our test base, are out of this world. They're incredible. And then to get in the airplanes with the test pilots, and then to accept ours and do it. So, but during this period, they started filming Top Gun Maverick. And what they were looking to do is find the best individuals at every aspect of the movie. And the movie, if you've seen it, kind of covers a lot of different things about naval aviation, which is really phenomenal. It covers low-level flight, air to ground, meaning dropping munitions, shooting down aircraft, flying off the aircraft, everything we do as Navy pilots. Mm-hmm. And they use, for example, on the aircraft carrier scenes, pilots from that aircraft carrier that was deployed. The people landing the airplanes were the landing signal instructors, the people who were best suited to do that. Yeah, I love that. The dogfighting scenes were flown by Top Gun instructors who were the leading individuals teaching dogfighting to the Navy. And so there were a few scenes where Tom Cruise and Jerry Bruckheimer wanted an airplane at a really low altitude. Traditionally in the Navy, we fly to 200 feet if you're proficient. And 200 feet to me at first sounds high, 200 feet, but that's not in a landing configuration. That's at full speed, low altitude. And even at 200 feet, we talk about the time that we're allowed to look inside the cockpit, almost like texting on your phone while you drive. You know, how often can you distract yourself from the task at hand? And generally it's 1 second when you're that low. You're allowed to look inside to change a radio frequency, reselect a new weapon, something like that. And so at 200 feet, you get 1 second to look inside, but at 10 or 20 feet, it's not existent. And the margin for error is gone. It's not even slim. It's just gone pretty much. And so the comment from the head of naval aviation at the time, our 3-star admiral, who's an incredible guy, said, "I'm not willing to accept that risk." And to some degree, and he was the one who relayed the story to me, but to some degree, we can't do the movie now, according to Tom and Jerry Bruckheimer. And so after this back and forth, the individual who's the liaison said, "I think the Blue Angels do this pretty routinely. There's definitely low passes. So can we find them?" And so then the call was made to the Blue Angel commanding officer, Eric Doyle. And he said, "Well, we're on the road all the time. I have pilots who can do this for sure. They're not trained in the new airplane that you're using. And I can't spare them for 6 or 8 weeks."
Yeah, they're a little busy.
They're a little busy. Yeah. Busiest job, I feel like, just about for me, certainly in my 20 years.
Yeah.
But now here I was working out of this little broom closet, flying airplanes 100 hours a year and eager to do more flying and less simulator work. And so the question was phrased, would I be interested in doing a few of these scenes? And of course, I was very excited to be a part of it and just to fly more, if nothing else. Right. And so that's how the pairing happened. And then it just became, they set the scenes up, and as we looked at the different scenes, is how do we mitigate the risk? Mm-hmm. And I'm really proud of Top Gun for the movie for a variety of reasons, but primarily because we filmed some very dynamic aviation scenes in a very safe way. Because at the end of the day, it's a movie. We're willing to accept risk here and there. And aviation is risky inherently. Every time you take off, you're accepting risk. Right. But there's less risk allowed for a movie than for combat ops.
It's like, how far do you want to go for a movie?
And in the first movie, a pilot died. Art Scholl was a civilian pilot, died filming that flat spin out to sea. And so we're not willing to risk that, an airplane or a pilot. And so we looked at the scenes they wanted. For example, the scene in the Dark Star on takeoff, where it's this Mach 10 airplane doing this low pass, dusting the admiral. We fly that same maneuver every single air show. I'd flown it hundreds, if not thousands of times. And so it was easy to fly that safely. And so let's go do that. And then another low altitude scene that was from the middle of the movie. They want an aircraft at 10 or 20 feet. Well, we fly, the Blue Angel solo pilots fly sneak pass. That's at low altitude. So that can be done too. And so we just started looking to say, how can we fly all these scenes? One of the lesser known scenes from the movie that was real was the inverted scene where Maverick is between two of the junior officers, rolls upside down, hangs out overhead. Here I am. And it was sort of a throwback to the original movie with the legendary scene where they're flipping the birds and passing foreign relations. But Top Gun Maverick, part of the drive was to do it real. Every time you see an airplane, it was filmed with a camera in the sky. And so we wanted to film that for real. But that is a Blue Angel maneuver. You know, the Diamond does it with 1 and 4 inverted. The Solos do it with a variety of different inverted maneuvers, but we can do it routinely and safely. So we filmed that for real. I was inverted, and upright was this commanding officer Top Gun for that scene.
So much authenticity behind it. And so many people to this day, I think, still think that half of the movie was CGI. Yeah. But you're the perfect person for the job.
Yeah, we do get that question a lot. And moreover, we get the question of who flew it. You know, I'm amazed they taught the actors how to fly. And the actors were incredible in that movie.
Yeah.
They weren't always piloting the aircrafts. And in the F-18, Navy pilots, Marine Corps pilots flew the airplanes, but they were in really dynamic situations.
What was the hardest part about flying for cameras versus flying operationally? I mean, it's a completely different ballgame.
Totally different ballgame. You're right. For me, it was how do we assess and handle the risk? So if we're flying off an aircraft carrier, if it's nighttime, and there were nights for me on the aircraft carrier where I thought the weather is so bad, where we are, where we're going, you know, it's just all of Pakistan is a thunderstorm from the surface to 50,000 feet. And we got to get through that to get to Afghanistan. They'll never send us. It's too risky. Thunk, off you go. Oof, okay.
Yeah.
There's basically, we'll accept a great deal of risk because there are men and women on the ground who need our support.
Right.
But for a movie, how much risk are we willing to accept? I would submit basically none. You know, the only risk is the risk inherent in aviation anyway. So we found the right people to fly the scenes. We put the right people on the ground to support the airborne personnel. And then we mitigated through good briefs. We briefed it like we would any military flight. We had the film crew in there, but it was still a military flight briefing. And it brought the same level of discipline and detail to every brief. And then the debrief, of course, matters every bit as much, if not more. So we did that each time too, had long debriefs. And that part mattered a great deal. So just understanding that it's a movie, we're willing to push the envelope, but we're not willing to accept any unnecessary risk. That, for me, that was the biggest difference.
Right. And Tom Cruise is notably a pilot himself. What was it like filming with him? You were in the front or the back and filming with him. How did that work, given that you have so much pressure on you to get these things right, you know, but you're not willing to take too much risk? What was the balance there, and how did that work?
I'll give credit where credit's due. I thought Tom was incredible. And I didn't know what to expect of him or any of the other actors or any of the crew when I arrived. And I wasn't shocked. I was just really pleasantly surprised by him as an individual, by everyone we worked with. He had a lot on the line. I was just flying an airplane, but it was his reputation if they're going to remake a movie. And so I know he knew what he wanted, but I never once felt like he pushed me past the point I was willing to go. And he wanted it to be intense and aggressive and dynamic, but he did it in a really tactful way, I felt like. And for the scenes we flew together, I was up front, he was in the back. They did a remarkable aspect with the F-18s where the entire rear cockpit was cameras. And so the actors were both the director of the scene, they were the hair and makeup artists, they were having to handle and they drove the pilot around to say, I need you to turn right 30 degrees, the sun angle's better over here. Yeah. We never consider sun angle when it comes to movie filming. We consider sun angle to shoot down an enemy aircraft.
Right.
That's where it comes for us. But the actors did great. And in the case of Tom, he is a very experienced pilot. We had wonderful conversations about the airplanes he owned, where he lived in, or he was filming in Europe. And I think he flew and owned maybe a Baron like I do for a while. And so I felt like just kids talking about aviation like we all are. And that's the wonderful thing about aviation.
Of course.
Whether you're a 15-year-old in training or whether you're an 80-year-old who just goes to the FBO every day to talk and have coffee. And we all love it for the same reason.
Exactly.
And it's this common bond we have. And so, of course, Tom and I bonded over aviation because we both had a love for it. But he also was so experienced and so strong in the airplane. And that's such a huge aspect. There's a mental aspect to flying in general and a physical aspect. In an F-18, the physical aspect can some degrees be weighted heavier. And the scenes we filmed were dynamic, and he was in the back. It is really challenging back there because there's no forward visibility. Oh. So it's just a recipe for air sickness, I feel like.
Of course, yeah.
And he wanted it intense, dynamic, aggressive, you name it. And he was, his thousands of hours flying airplanes, you learn how to be both a good passenger and a good pilot. And we filmed the scenes we did in the way we did because he struck the perfect balance of being a part of the flight as a crew member and then letting me do what I needed to do in certain cases.
That's amazing. One of my favorite parts about Lead Solo, your book, is a scene where you're sitting next to a woman on a commercial flight and she's watching one of the scenes that you were in Top Gun Maverick, and she catches you staring. And you've told me that happens frequently.
Yeah. Well, I fly Delta a lot because I travel out of Hartsfield, and Delta, I guess, just has that. It's been in the seatbacks ever since 2022. So I won't say it's every flight, but it's pretty routine for me. Yeah, when I was writing this book, I had my laptop open. My wife was sitting next to me. I was typing away about lessons I'd learned from that scene. And then I looked forward, and between the two seats in front of me, that whoever was watching TV had that exact movie and scene on as I'm writing about
crazy.
it. So the irony there wasn't lost on me. But the story I relayed in the book was, I don't remember exactly when it transpired, but what I remember is the middle seat was empty. We were back there in like 33 ABC or something, and I'm on the window, middle seat's open. There's a lady next to me. She has the movie on, and I glanced up. I was reading a book. I glanced up, and it was right about it was the scene I'd flown. And I'm just like a child. I couldn't look away for a moment.
We all are.
And so I watched it, and at some point, I don't know if she's uncomfortable or awkward. She looks at me, and I'm looking at her screen, and she takes her earphones. She goes, "It's an awesome movie. You should watch it." And I go, "I don't like airplanes."
That's hilarious.
That was pretty fun. But that, like I said, that happens a decent bit.
It's crazy for you to know that you got to work on something so memorable that so many people have seen. How does that feel?
What I love about it most for me, the special part for me, is that I see the movie differently. Mm-hmm. So when you watch it, you're always seeing the actor or the actress. The only times you'll ever see the Navy Marine Corps pilots is if it's the older over-the-shoulder camera, where you see the pilot's head from behind. That's the actual Navy Marine Corps pilot that's flying the aircraft. And you just get to see, like, Tom is in better shape than me, so my neck is fatter and less tan. So that's the only giveaway in that case. But you see these actors behind you. So you're viewing the movie looking through the vertical tails of the aircraft, mm-hmm. whereas I saw the movie looking straight ahead. Mm-hmm. And so I take a little bit of pride that I saw the movie slightly differently. That's my perspective. I remember the canyon going forward, not looking backwards.
You talk a lot about perspective, from being in the Blue Angels to filming Top Gun Maverick and now flying in general aviation. How did you take the perspective from flying in the Blue Angels and translate that, or really your whole naval flying career? How did you translate that into more of just your personal life?
My wife and I have called it the gift of perspective. And what we mean by gift of perspective is the way we challenge everyday life's problems is different, having been together for 20 years and going through multiple deployments, children born when I wasn't there. It, to some degree, makes everything a little bit easier as we approach today's problems. From the Blue Angels air show, we fly this air show in such a way where everything counts. Our altitude matters, our speed matters, the separation from each aircraft matters. And I remember, you freeze it in your brain what you do during the show, you bring it back to the debrief, and then you speak through, I was high, I was low, I was too close, I was too fast. And we bring all that to bear for our debrief so we improve. But the way we debrief ourselves is with a camera mounted at the crowd line. And the point is, we want to see the show the way the crowd sees it. And if it looked good to us in the air, but it didn't look good to them, then we flew the show wrong. Mm-hmm. And so the only perspective that matters is that of the spectator who's watching the air show. And we have to adjust our air show for it to be right for them. And at first, it doesn't compute necessarily. And you're flying in positions that you say the diamond has to fly in some really abnormal positions to make it look like a diamond. Because it wouldn't be, if you balance it in the sky and you're in a certain angle of bank, it doesn't look like a balanced diamond. Mm-hmm. And so they're having to fly in bizarre formation positions to look good to the crowd. And the same thing for the solo pilots. And so the lesson that I learned there is, if you really go to trouble to understand other people's perspective, it's the whole walk a mile in someone else's shoes. It's the empathetic aspect. It's saying, rather than saying, I understand, but actually not saying that, but putting myself in your position and saying, I need to really see what it's like from Amelia's mind right now. Recognize what she's thinking, how she's approaching this problem. If you do that, for me, it had a game-changing effect. If you put yourself in someone else's perspective, you can be a better boss or you can be a better employee. Very few people with a hammer and nails say, I wonder what my boss thinks of me right now. Am I doing the job he wants me to do? Let me think about what's important to him. Let me put myself in his shoes. What does he want from me? If you do that, well, all of a sudden, you become employee number one. You're employee of the month. If you're willing to take the time and effort to think about the people you work for and what they would like you to do, what the person they want you to be, and vice versa. As a leader, it certainly matters too. If you are really empathetic towards your sailors, your Marines, your employees, mm-hmm. I think it helps. So that was, for me, a really interesting Blue Angel lesson about perspective.
Yeah, that's an amazing take, because again, it can be translated to any area of your life, work, personal, flying. And you even said, you can translate what you learn in other aircraft to, other types of flying. Mm-hmm. It's the same idea.
It is. It's so obvious. It's so easy, but I think it's often forgotten.
Do your kids ever have friends realize that their dad flew in Top Gun Maverick? I feel like for me, I would be telling everybody, but maybe people don't realize how cool it was.
I feel like my kids are wholly unimpressed by my
hilarious.
Background. They grew up at air shows. Somehow they managed to sleep through Blue Angel air shows. like any 1 or 3-year-old would. And then as they grew up and as I went back, they were a bit older. So it was just part of their life. They didn't think anything of it. They, lived on military bases. Jet noise was just a common occurrence.
That's it's
normal.
Crazy perspective to me. So we've covered flying through canyons and hanging out with Tom Cruise. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk more about the focus and the discipline that we briefly touched on and that you mentioned in your new book. But it's a little less cinematic, but probably much more difficult, again, as we've discussed. But you talk about focus not just being a mindset, but as a learned skill. What's one way that we could all train our focus like a fighter pilot or like a Blue Angel?
We spend a lot of time doing a couple things. First, we talk about compartmentalization. Mm-hmm. How do we focus in the moment on what we're doing? When you're landing on the aircraft carrier at night in bad weather, not for a minute are you worried about what you're having for dinner or what bill you didn't get paid or whatever the case might be. All of your normal life's distractions don't apply in that moment. But how do you get to that point? So in our brief, we'll talk about compartmentalizing. And for me, what worked is you have to figure out all of your distractions, identify them. Say, these are distractions in my life. I'm going to deal with this later. I'm going to write it down. I'll deal with this at 4 p.m. this afternoon. This is something I'll deal with on Thursday and have a plan for it. Because once you say, it's a distraction, but I now have a plan to deal with it, it's no longer a distraction. Same thing for physical and mental needs. And sounds so basic, but if you have physical discomfort, if you worked out too hard in the morning, if you haven't eaten, and your body is now having to take its energy to devote towards something that you've done wrong to some degree, right? If you haven't properly eaten that morning and now your stomach's churning, you're taking mental focus away for digestion or something, right? So if you train your body physically and you eat right and whatever, now your body is reacting properly, and you need that because the F-18 is a very physical endeavor. But then being able to rid yourself of distractions to feel good, to get in the airplane. For me, once the canopy came down, I was in my own little world. I thought about nothing other than flying that air show for the next 45 minutes. And that really mattered for me, to put myself in that position where I was able to have clarity of mind because I was physically and mentally prepared and strong. It makes a big difference. And it's a learned skill. So you might have a distraction might come up, and then you recognize, okay, that didn't go as it should. I'll address that next time. And every time you do, it gets a little better. And then the other aspect is visualization. And for us, that's a big one. We as a team, if you've ever seen a Blue Angel documentary or seen any of the stories, as a whole group, and it seems a little kooky or even awkward at first, but as a group of aviators, we'll sit together and close our eyes and put our hands on the stick and throttle and talk through our comm and our maneuvers, putting ourselves into the airplane. And I don't know, having not grown up in general aviation, if that's a regular occurrence, but I know for sure it works, because if you just envision yourself in the airplane and you're flying, you're seeing deviations, you're responding to them appropriately. To do that in advance makes the event go so much better, and it allows you to focus in the moment.
There's a detail that you describe. If the stick pressure relaxes even an eighth of an ounce during Blue Angel's air show, that there could be an accident. How did you mentally and physically prepare for that level of intensity and that level of focus beforehand, before you even got out to the ramp and got in your aircraft? What did you have to go through in your head to prepare for that?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question because there's a number of things going on there. And that maneuver, as I described in the book, is the takeoff maneuver for Blue Angel number 6, where we do a low transition. And the idea is that you, at flying speed, you pull back on the stick just enough to rotate the nose tire and then allow the main gears to lift off. And you feel the lift off, but then you have your hand already on the gear switch. And so the minute the gears lift off, you're applying gentle pressure to the gear switch. And we have a weight on wheels indicator. So it won't let you lift it if it feels weight. But the minute the weight is relaxed, the gear can come up. And then you relax that stick almost an infinitesimally small amount. And now the airplane should stay almost at taxi height, but accelerates rapidly because the gear and the flaps are up. So it's going from, it's not climbing, you're not dissipating any energy into the vertical, you're just accelerating. But as you accelerate, you're pulling back on the stick. And so one of the unknown or somewhat unknown aspects of the Blue Angels is we put a spring on the stick. And the spring is mechanical. It comes from the floorboard. It pulls the stick forward. And so then for us to fly in level flight, you're applying roughly 40 pounds of back pressure to the stick. And it allows us to fly really close together because the F-18, like any machine, has some bit of null zone or dead zone. So if you were to push it, pull it, whatever, it might not respond. But we have to have it respond right away. And so we like that artificial feel, we call it, that force from the spring generates to do that. But if you're in a 40-pound curl to be in level flight and you're 2 or 3 or 5 feet off the ground at 300 knots, if you relax that pressure, the aircraft has the capability to go 30, 40, 50,000 feet per minute rate up or down. And so if you're only a couple feet high, it's not a whole lot of weight release. Like I said, eighth of an ounce might be an exaggeration. It might be a millionth of an ounce. It's hard to really quantify that exactly, and it'll happen instantly. And so there is that level of focus. You're on the razor's edge, just like you are when you land on the aircraft carrier, just like the Blue Angel Diamond is when they fly. There's a point in the Blue Angel Diamond Air Show where the four of them are so close that if you're the number 4 pilot, and this is not an exaggeration, we can move the seat vertically up or down. And we do it till it's one fist above our head. So you sit in the airplane and you pull it up until you feel the top of your hand touch the glass. You're at the right height generally. If you were to jettison the canopy, at one particular maneuver, number 4 could grab the wings of 2 and 3 at the same time from his seat. Incredible. And so it's that same level of focus. And it comes through repeated efforts. It comes through finding experienced individuals and then training them properly, briefing at length, debriefing at length, and then getting the practice, the repetitions to do it. But then most importantly, really, really, really working hard every flight to be better. And so this is a really cool military aspect that I don't know gets enough attention in the general aviation world, but I think it should. And it might come off militaristic, and I, of course, don't want it to, but I feel like it does if you're not used to it, which is the brilliance of the Blue Angels and the way that this team becomes a high-function team is not from great machines. It's not from great people necessarily. It's from the dedicated effort to debrief our air shows, to use the crowd's perspective, but to be willing to admit what we did right and wrong, specifically what we did wrong, talk about our mistakes, talk about our the things we can improve on, and have it in an open forum where every single person lists their failings for the day. And then once you've done that, you can be your own harshest critic. You've identified what you've done wrong. And now as a team, we can learn. But I've found, like both in my time in GA and small aircraft and in large corporate, large cabin class aircraft, it's really unlikely that people will give themselves good debriefs. But if you get into the airplane every day, say, I'm going to be a little bit better at this than I was yesterday, at my comm, at my SA, at my landing proficiency, you name it. There's every time you take off an airplane, there are 1,000 ways you can improve. And it doesn't hurt you to try because it just makes you better at what you do. And then you love it even more for all the same reasons. And so that aspect of the Blue Angels is terrific. And to the degree that I can, and we all can, really making the most out of each flight helps.
Yeah, the dedication's incredible. And that same low transition takeoff is the one that you did with the opening scene in Top Gun.
That's right.
So it translates for sure. Looking back at everything you've accomplished, what's one moment in the cockpit that you wish you could relive? I'm sure there's plenty, but just one.
Yeah, I do have plenty. That's, can I do 2? One military, one GA?
Obviously. Yeah,
okay.
Of course.
For all the military ones, I would say perhaps the very first time I landed on the aircraft carrier, and it wasn't an F-18, it was a T-45. That's the final graduation exercise to some degree. And you go out to the aircraft carrier, that we call it the boat. It's kind of a jokey term, but we go out there by ourselves. You'll have one instructor and maybe 3 students on their wings. And I was always told, I don't know if this is true or not, that you go by yourself because it's so dangerous. They don't want to risk the life of an instructor in the back seat. And there's very little you can do. The margin for error, as I said, is so slight. But you go out by yourself the first time, and then you get in the landing pattern, and you might get 1 or 2 touch and goes, and then you have your first trap. And there's some guidance ahead of time that you're going to think you've crashed, you're going to be at full power like you're supposed to do, and you're not going to know where you are. And all that's true. It happens exactly like they say. But at some point I had landed, I'd trapped, I'd caught the wires, been pulled out, I'd taxed off the side. Now they fill you up with gas. And so I'm chalked, I'm sitting there on the aircraft carrier flight deck, and my, I guess, emotions, my nerves, I'm starting to slowly calm down because you're pretty amped up in the moment. And so I'm having a moment, I'm coming back to life to some degree, and I'm looking around me, processing what's happening. And here I am on an aircraft carrier. You're out hundreds of miles off the coast of Florida for us that day. You've just landed on this ship. There are other airplanes taking off and landing, but the world slows down. And I looked around and I thought, oh my gosh, I landed on a boat. Here I am, I'm getting on gas. And if I want, it's the rest of my life is going to be spent here. And I'm going to live on this ship and have my friends here and work out here and eat here and lead sailors here. And in that moment, I was so excited to be there, to be on this ship, to be in an airplane on a ship was just the most remarkable thing in the world to me. And what I love about it now, thinking back, is I was young, I was 24 maybe, but to be so excited about your life for any one thing was just so cool that I would wish that for my children, that they could have a job that they're just so excited about, not just for tomorrow, not just when you wake up, but forever. And it's just such an incredible way to serve. And so I love that. I just love picturing my brain coming to grips with what was happening in that moment. So that's a really special military moment for me.
And if you love what you do, you'll never work another day in your life.
You won't work a day in your life. And actually, I flew here yesterday for this event, and I guess Warren Buffett just released, or just said he was going to step down as CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. And he had a couple comments he made. And one of them, he said, I take joy in the fact that someone working with Charlie was better than making $1 billion or $100 billion. And then another comment that I loved what I did so much, the money didn't matter. And I would wish that on anyone, that they love what they do to such a degree that money doesn't matter, time spent at work doesn't matter, none of it matters. And even I mentioned earlier how much I enjoyed being a flight instructor for that year I had and how much I loved that airplane. And there was a point there where my mom had called, and I was single and I was flying these airplanes all the time. And she said, are you going to take a vacation this year? Do you want to go on a trip with the family? Do you want to do something? And I said, no, I don't think so. Well, why not? Well, I'm working. And she goes, yeah, but you should take a vacation. I said, I can't think of anything I would rather do right now on any vacation in the world than what I get to do every day. And I'm paid to do it. Not much, but I'm paid to do it.
Yeah, it's amazing.
What an incredible blessing in your life to have that. And so I feel that way. Both, Warren Buffett's comment that, if you can surround yourself with people you love and then do something you love, you don't work a day in your life. My GA moment, I have some fun GA moments too, but, as an airplane owner, which was a different thing than just renting a 150 on a dry or a wet lease. Our family, it allowed me to carry my love for aviation past just doing it for work. And so we bought a Baron and fly it a good bit. I fly it for work. We have a real estate development company that I use it for, but also occasionally we'll take it on vacation. And a benefit of living in the North Georgia mountains is that the Bahamas are about a 3-hour flight. And for us, that's paradise. The crystal clear blue water and being able to go down and fish and get lobster and all the normal fun Bahamian things to do. But the first time we flew down there in the Baron, it was our family, and you get out, you head south along the Florida coast, you bang a left around Titusville, you shoot out for that last 30, 45 minutes, and you can just see the water start to turn crystal clear. We land at Treasure Key. We bopped over to Green Turtle Key.
Oh, what a dream.
And in that moment, it was just the coolest thing about aviation to me, that here's our family in the middle of nowhere in the Bahamas, in our little airplane, and it just said, I'm done flying military jets, but I have a lifetime worth of general aviation left to fly, and all the places it can take you if you're willing to do it. And that was really special to me. And we've gone back multiple times a year, every year since. And I love it. It's the $100 hamburger that's now, but to a greater degree, because you can enjoy it with your friends and family.
Well, I was going to ask you if you miss military flying, and you're still involved in the Blues and being an ex-Blue Angel and, staying involved where you can after Top Gun Maverick, but do you miss it at all, or does that GA flying really scratch that itch for you?
Yeah, I feel like it's a young person sport to some degree. The aircraft are so physically demanding that when I was in my early 40s still flying on the team, I was getting grandfather jokes all the time. Hey, Gramps. Yeah. But everything's relative. I don't miss the military flying. I'm grateful that I had the opportunity, but I'm really grateful for the next chapter.
Before I ask the last question, be honest, because I think that this is funny, and we talk a lot about perspective, but can you still go to air shows and watch them normally?
I can go to air shows. And as I said earlier, I love it when our exes are involved and do regularly attend the air shows. For me, watching them now, the only thing that strikes me is it makes me a little nervous. And flying thousands of hours with the Blue Angels, I was never nervous once. I mean, even when things started to go wrong, you just focus on what's happening. But I wasn't nervous in the airplane. You're focused, but you're not nervous. But when I watch them, I feel like I'm an old grandmother. Like, boys, you're flying too low. Lift it up.
Be careful.
Gosh, what are you doing? You're too close. So that part for me is a little challenging. But
it's understandable.
I do enjoy it, and I want to see the team succeed.
Yeah.
But it is... it's a little nerve-wracking.
Right. Well, and we briefly touched on this. My first air venture that I ever got to go to was 2017, and you were actually flying lead solo in that show. The only time that I believe that the Blue Angels were at Oshkosh.
I think so. Certainly in the last 20 or 30 years, the only time we've been to Oshkosh. It's a really challenging air show. I mean, it is the air show mecca of the world.
Of course.
And it was I don't know how the stars aligned that year and how the air show was able to get the full airspace, because they usually can't to have a jet team. But yeah, it was that was wild to me to taxi down the taxiway and see that number of people there, because we've done big air shows on the beaches with millions of people on the coast of Florida, coast of California. But there was something different about Oshkosh.
Yeah,
it's
in the
amazing.
air.
It is.
It's a feeling for sure. I think everybody, no matter what type of background you have, whether you've never seen an air show in your life, you have no aviation experience, you're military, you currently serve in the military, or you're just GA, I think it hits home for a lot of people
for sure.
in different ways. But that's cool. I just thought it was cool that we just put that 2 and 2 together. So
yep, small world.
You've lived this incredible arc from combat deployment to the Blue Angels to Top Gun Maverick, and we've touched on a lot of this, but if you could pass on one lesson to the next generation of pilots, what would that one lesson be?
Well, it's a lesson I learned at the start of aviation, and I kind of mentioned in the book that my career in aviation started as a failure, and it went downhill from there. So, even though that's hard to believe.
You wanted to be a SEAL.
I wanted to be a SEAL. I went to the Naval Academy to be a SEAL. I was assigned aviation. It was my second choice, and part of the challenge for me as an aviator was you can't really choose your airplane. So even if they'd offered me fighter pilot or Osprey pilot or something, it might have changed the equation a little bit, but still, it wasn't what I'd asked to do, but it really wasn't relevant what I'd want to do. It's relevant that I'm serving my country, and so however I'm asked to serve is how I'm going to do it, and to the best of my ability. But nonetheless, the hard part for me was that I spent all of my college time doing Navy SEAL things, or what I thought that was physical fitness, skydiving, rock climbing, underwater, scuba diving, the things that prepare you for that, which don't help at all in flying any kind of aircraft. And so I showed up to flight school totally unprepared for it, having not been in any airplane ever. A lot of the people I was competing with were very experienced pilots. And I was terrible. I couldn't, as I kind of alluded to earlier, I couldn't even taxi the airplane. I was taking extra instruction just to be allowed to taxi it before they'd even let me go to the runway. And I wasn't good at any aspect of it, I didn't feel like. And so I have a chapter in the book about failure, but I start with a quote, and it says, all of us are failures, or at least the best of us are. And what it taught me, because I had nothing to start from, and because I failed a lot, the only difference was I just didn't give up. And I'm grateful now in retrospect that I didn't give up, but all of those failures considerably helped in my approach then from there on. And then as I went through 20 years in the Navy, what I understood and learned was that most of the people who I really looked up to and respected, they weren't perfect, far from it. They just weren't quitters, and they were willing to fail and challenge themselves and then learn from their failures. And as I kind of talked about in the debrief earlier, every time you get in an airplane, I mess something up, multiple things. If I'm willing to learn from them, that means more than if I were just great to begin with and didn't make any effort. And so the aspect to me, I look at it from a test pilot perspective. And so when we have a new airplane, we develop the next 5th or 6th gen fighter. The engineers, the smartest minds in the world, put together this aircraft. And then the bravest test pilots go out and test it. And they take this aircraft to the point where it fails, because they have to. So they fly it up into a point that it's so high that the air is so thin that the engines turn off. And they maneuver it so aggressively that the wings start to almost rip off. And they push it through all its paces until we know what it can do. But you have to push it until it fails, until you know what it can do. And then they say, all right, we're going to taper that back. If the aircraft wings can hold 10 or 12 Gs, then we'll tell the pilot it's good for 7 or 8, that sort of thing. But I believe that same mindset is true for us personally. And we call it the aircraft's envelope. So if we're willing to push the envelope of the aircraft, somebody has to determine what the envelope even is. But if we're not willing to push ourselves as individuals in our challenges, in our hobbies, in our career, if we don't try it, then we don't know what our envelope is. But if we push ourselves to the breaking point, now we have, to some degree, discovered our own personal envelope. And you know what your capabilities are. And there's an ever-expanding envelope, too, as you get stronger, better, more experienced.
And it grows with you.
It grows with you.
Yeah.
And so by doing so, by being willing to fail, by striving to such a degree that you allow yourself to fail, failures can be a positive. And as I think I said to you earlier, I was listening to someone talk one time, and they said someone had failed, and the response was congrats. And I loved it. It just hadn't occurred to me to say that, but it really is. When you fail at something, congratulations.
Right.
You know what your limits are, and now you know how to fix it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that, because I think that it's inevitable. Every single person is going to fail at some point in their life. It's whether you take that and you learn from it, which is obviously a military mindset, but I don't know why everybody doesn't adopt it. I mean, it's a challenge. It's difficult. You have to work on it, just like you work on your proficiency in your flying, but you have to stay proficient yourself. So that's a great way to look through life. So I love that.
There's one, it might have been Edison that said, I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 things that don't work, and there's another one where it's failure is just the opportunity to starting over more intelligently. And both of them apply. And it really is. It's once you accept the fact that you're not perfect and you're willing to make mistakes for the greater good, then it has, once again, a game-changing effect.
I love that. Well, Frank, thank you so much for all of your stories and the insight. And I'm really excited about your book coming out. And we just can't thank you enough for being here and hanging out with us today.
Thanks. Wonderful to be here.
Yeah.